All right, let's talk about Matt Walsh's beef with the Little Mermaid. Now, I'm going to play a video where he responds to a viewer's question about a previous show that he did. Russell, you apparently know the background of this. I did not. So why don't you set this up, what we're about to see? Put it in some context.
All right. So his original video was weighing in on the reaction to the trailer and the issues that it raises and the question of whether it's appropriate or not to recast characters who were, he took on the, should James Bond be black? Should Superman be black? He just took on the whole subject. His take was predictable. Hey, why not just create? And this is also what you hear from a lot of nerds who, complain about this with diversifying Lord of the Rings and things like that. Why not just create a character of that race? Why race swap? And he got into some cases where race swapping is considered acceptable and other cases where it's not, where there's a certain amount of hypocrisy there. But overall, he felt that we just shouldn't be caring about this at all. That basically his ultimate take was it should be okay no matter what. And he used the fact that Morgan Freeman in The Shawshank Redemption, even though it's a million years ago, was playing a character who was white in the story. And
in the book, in the short story.
In the short story. And he was very complimentary about his performance. They're saying, hey, he was perfect. So if we can do that the other way, then we have no problem. But they would burn down cities if you recast Medea with Bob Odenkirk. So his issue was there's a double standard here where you're trying to remove white people from these characters, but you could never do it the other way. So that was his overall take. Now, the next day in his mailbag, in his segment on his show, he had somebody asking about that. And I guess you have the clip so we can.
Yeah, we will take a look.
Show it.
Max Winter says, a black actor playing the Little Mermaid really is a case of white erasure. All forms of art, including fairy tales, are meant to be reflections of the author's experiences and observations. Hans Christian Andersen probably based the Little Mermaid based on experiences he went through in his home country of Denmark. So it makes sense that most of his characters would be white, since that's the world and the people he was surrounded by. Yeah, I'm given the way that we deal with these sorts of issues, I'm sympathetic to that. Now, I would be fine, like we talked about yesterday. We don't have to rehash the entire thing. But if we all agreed that race in films and TV shows, especially fictional stories, don't matter, and we're going to take a kind of colorblind casting approach, and it doesn't matter as long as the actor is good. If we could all agree on that, then I'd be on board. And as I said, that's basically what it was for many years, what it was back in the 90s. But what I cannot abide by is the double standard thing where we say, well, the casting in casting matters only for certain races and not for others. No, we're not doing that. Also, by the way, with The Little Mermaid, can we also just mention that just from a scientific perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have someone with darker skin who lives deep in the ocean. I mean, if anything, not only should the Little Mermaid be pale, she should actually be translucent. If you look at deep sea creatures, they're like translucent. They have no kind of pigmentation whatsoever. And they're just like these horrifying, they look like skeletons floating around in the ocean. That's what the Little Mermaid should look like. She should be totally pale and skeletal, where you can see her skull through her face. And that would actually be a version of Little Mermaid that I would watch.
Also, from a scientific perspective, crabs can't sing.
Wrong.
Yeah. Crabs can't sing. Also from a scientific perspective, there are no fucking mermaids. I mean, maybe that was an attempt at deadpan humor there. But look, I want to put this up on the screen here. Sorry, Virtuoso. I didn't mean to veto you, but that wasn't the comment I was going for. Sorry. I didn't mean to. Not that your comment's bad. But Gina says, I love when white people say colorblind when referring to race. Yeah, look, I think that is a decent point because, look, okay, Hans Christian Andersen was Danish Denmark is obviously a majority white country, although there are some black people living in Denmark, obviously. But the Little Mermaid is not a story about Denmark. It's a Danish folktale in the sense that the author was Danish, but it doesn't speak to the Danish experience. It's a fairy tale. It's a myth. And so the idea that like Ariel has to be white because the author of this folktale, which was written almost 200 years ago now, lived in Denmark, that seems kind of ridiculous. And it seems to be, I mean, he talks about this sort of like double standard where you can do colorblind casting. I think that's all good. Like, there are parts that we just sort of assume are white if they're colorblind.
The idea that you can't have a black Little Mermaid, that's not really his argument. As far as some people will argue that was really not his argument. What he was saying at the beginning of the clip, that's his argument, that if it's going to be colorblind, it should all be colorblind. That's what he's actually arguing.
But like a white Medea would be
as the translucent fish thing. That's a joke. This is the side of this that's interesting to me. He made a very much more complex argument over the course of 2 videos that the left didn't touch. He made a joke, which was clearly a joke, and it hit their sweet spot because by pretending that was a serious comment, they get to do the we're so intellectually superior, we have so much more education, where does he not understand the science of fish? They get to do that. Whereas to actually take on the argument, which you can take on the actual argument he made. That's not the sweet spot. That's work. This is low-hanging fruit for libs. That's why the media was all over this.
Yeah, but what I would say is, I mean, even to that first point, I mean, it's not like casting a black person as Ariel is not the same as casting a white man as Medea, the Tyler Perry character, because those shows are about the black culture. Experience. It's about the black family. It's about black culture. Whereas the fucking Little Mermaid is not, and to the extent that it was 200 years ago when it was written, which I'm not a literary scholar, so I couldn't tell you, it's certainly not now. It's a Disney cartoon. It's popular entertainment now, and so it's not the same thing to cast a black Little Mermaid as it is to cast a white guy as Medea, or to remake whatever Encanto, the Mexican Disney film, or Puerto Rico. I don't even know what it was. I'm risking getting canceled by calling it Mexican because I don't know. A Latinx musical seems Mexican to me, even though Lin-Manuel Miranda's Puerto Rican. So I don't know. I don't know what was going on there. There was some cultural appropriation going on there. It sounds like. What's a Puerto Rican guy doing writing a Mexican folktale? If I'm right about that. If I'm not, I guess the channel's canceled. I don't know.
This is where the stuff gets complicated. Gina here is pointing out that mermaids originate in the Mediterranean, and you've had legends of mermaids, I believe, even in parts of Africa. So the idea of mermaids is not particularly Danish. It certainly didn't originate there. The myth of mermaids. Where this argument starts to get more complicated, we were talking about this a little offline. You have the Tolkien people who, the foremost African-American critique of a diverse Lord of the Rings comes from a guy with a channel called Just Some Guy. And he is a Tolkien fanatic. If you have ever tried to read the Silmarillion, you will appreciate how much of a fanatic this guy is, because according to him, and I have no reason to doubt it based on his videos, he reads it again once a year. The fucking Silmarillion. Okay, that is like dry as a desert. That's like reading those history books that were really not written for a mass market, like predates that, where it's just, and King Robert did have a son, and in 1214 they planted trees. Like the Silmarillion is like that, only with mythology. That's a hard slog. He argues that you should not diversify Lord of the Rings because Tolkien's intention was to create a British folklore that might have existed if they had not been invaded by the Vikings. He went and looked at this old folklore that predated the Vikings and tried to expand on it in the way that he thought it might have evolved. So the argument is, clearly this is inherently British folklore. So why are you going to do that? Why not just develop African folklore? If you want, you wouldn't put a white person in that. That's a more grounded version of this argument, which again, you can disagree with. I mean, there's definitely, coming out of theater has been having this argument for longer than film and TV. This is a pretty recent conversation in film and TV. Being a theater guy, I'm sure you know, Keaton, it was really Joseph Papp who broke the color line in casting Shakespeare and started saying, hey, why don't we just cast whoever? Like, why do these characters need to be white? And what, as a theater person, I will say, you know what? Over time, my experience as a director and as a theater goer, people will accept any convention if you commit to it and it's consistent. If you want to use blue cloth to represent water, that's okay. You just have to do it every time you want to represent water. You can't then go hyper realistic in the next scene. You just have to be consistent. At this point, because of the precedent that Papp started, blind casting is the norm for classical. It's the norm for anything from Sophocles to Shakespeare. Any of that is blind casting. Doing it with things like Death of a Salesman, it's more controversial, but it's certainly done. There are certain things that's obviously inappropriate with, like fences. You would not cast in a diverse way, Matt Walsh's opinion notwithstanding. It's, for me, coming out of a theater background.
White fences would be called gates. Wouldn't be called fences. Called gates.
As a theater person, this is almost like I'm watching TV and film have a conversation that theater had 60 years ago. That's how it's striking me, that they're just getting around to this idea that, maybe people's imaginations are broad enough that you don't have to cast a mermaid white.
Well, yeah, right. And it's also about the audience. It's about the open-mindedness of the audience, not just in terms of like politics and what their racial attitudes are, but open-mindedness in terms of like how willing they are to be offered an experience by an artist, by a team of artists, right? Okay, we are going to present to you this piece of work. It's here for you to either like or dislike. We hope you like it, but if not, you can fuck off. That's an artist's attitude. But that's not how movies are made anymore, right? I mean, movies are catered to audiences now. Like, I feel like Paramount and Fox and Universal, these may as well be like restaurant brands now. They cater the product to what they think the audience wants. If the audience wants it mild and not spicy, they'll leave the pepper out, right? If the audience wants it a little sweeter, they'll put a dab of honey. And that's how they prepare these movies now. You hardly ever see a movie that just is so bold and confident and just puts itself out there and expresses itself in such a way that the audience could either take or leave. And those are the really great movies. Those are the pieces of art that resonate most strongly with people. Like, Get Out, a perfect example of turning woke ideology on its head, turning your expectations completely inside out. The brilliant thing about that movie is that the first half hour is designed to trick you into thinking it's a shallow, libby, woke bullshit movie. Like when they hit the deer and the cop comes and the cop asks her black boyfriend for his ID, she sticks up for him. She's like, you don't have to show him your ID. And we think, okay, great, this is the white girlfriend being, whatever, very PC and very white saviory, standing up for her black boyfriend. Okay, yawn, seen this a million times before. By the end of the movie, we realize that, no, the reason she stood up for him is so the cop didn't see his ID because she was about to kidnap him and cut half his brain out. And they didn't want to know who went missing. And so it played with your expectations. It gave you something that you didn't know you were getting and just put itself out there for you to either love or hate. And most people loved it. And I feel like movies aren't made like that anymore. That's not how the system works anymore. 99% of movies now are just tailored to audience expectation. And so when you make a choice that is like supposedly this edgy choice, having a black Little Mermaid, that pisses off a lot of people who say, I'm sorry, waiter, I ordered my Little Mermaid white. Right? Because that's the attitude of the audience. That's the attitude of the audience. The audience is an entitled restaurant goer who feels like they are owed a product that they can expect and that they can digest easily and shit out and forget about, just like when you go to a restaurant.
All right. I'm actually going to disagree with you here a little bit. A lot of this debate is really focused on Disney right now. Somebody here mentioned the Fandom Menace. It's a YouTube, a group of Hollywood haters. All right. A lot of the backlash that you're getting to Disney is precisely that they are not catering to the fan base of a lot of their products. We're at a very weird moment here.
Well, but that's what I mean.
You have to remember.
But that's what I mean. That's what I mean. That's what I mean. That's my point.
Oh,
the point is that they're not. No, the point is
to them.
Well, no, because they're so used to being catered to that they expect to be catered to. So when a studio makes a choice like this, it's seen as this big affront to the tastes of their audience.
Well, it's very yes, and it's. I will be very interested from a business and a sociological perspective how all of this goes, because what they've done with the fantasy genre, and the comic books and the superheroes, because the point of view that they're taking, instead of trying to diversify, instead of trying to integrate more diverse characters in, because they've almost taken a tone of hating the fans, of almost intentionally antagonizing the traditional fans of these properties. The question is, well, do women and people of color want to watch superhero movies to the extent that the traditional lonely white male audience did? Like, are you gonna draw in as many of that audience? Because the numbers for Ms. Marvel suggest no. You can't really replace that fan base with the fan base that you want, because you have to remember, they've shown internal meetings that leaked. Who do you think the people who run Disney are? They're Ivy League graduates who have been, reared on wokeness. Like, this is ideological for them. It's not really marketing. They're trying to be able to push woke messaging in a very, I feel, self-defeating and obnoxious way. I feel you could bring all these people in, and that's the best way to go about it. But they want to antagonize the original fan base because for them, they don't like those people. They don't really. I mean, it's very clear from the way they write a lot of this stuff that they have nothing but contempt for the original fans of these properties. In the end, is that sustainable? I don't think so as a business. I mean, maybe Disney has so much money coming in from so many sources, they can get away with it if they're that committed to it. But I think there's only so many like Thor, Love and Thunder box offices they can get before they go in another direction. Maybe I'm wrong, but their numbers have been steadily dropping with that shift in gear from Avengers Endgame into Phase 4. And a lot of the Star Wars stuff too. I mean, we talked about this on the She-Hulk video. I think the big problem is they got a lot of shitty writers, and they deflect from that onto upset fans. And a lot of what they're complaining about, they're not wrong. The more I'm not talking about the basement dwelling incels, but the ones who have a point here. I mean, there's definitely those. We got it on the She-Hulk video. We got some comments from people who clearly were woman haters. Not the majority, but we got a couple who clearly had issues with women, and didn't. I'm sorry. What's getting you there?
No, who clearly had it. I was just thinking of the people.
Did you read some of those?
I read a couple of them, but to me, it's just funny.
There were it's psychos. When you get into that
funny
stuff, like you draw some psychos out.
People who post that kind of shit on YouTube chat threads are funny. Yeah. It's funny because you have to think, what are they doing? What are they doing that they have time and the desire to do that?
All right, so for the engagement, I went back and forth with a couple of them, and you're right. Like, what the, I had a guy very vociferously arguing with me that no woman could do this, and I said, and that's never my argument because action.
No woman can do what? Turn into a green
and pray. His issue was a woman couldn't do that, and I said, okay, well, so do you have an issue with John Wick? Because any human would be dead in 3 seconds in any scene in a John Wick movie. He said, a man could get close to John Wick. This fucking guy falls off buildings, hits the fire escape in a way that would shatter your spine in 5 places, hits the ground and gets back up to fight more.
I don't think I saw that comment saying a woman could never do what the prey heroine could do.
Yeah, and I
would have said she could do it to you. Yep. I'm sure they could do it to you.
My response to that.
They may not be able to do it to an alien predator.
Action movies have been male power fantasies forever. Like, what's wrong with it being a woman power fantasy? Right. I mean, it's all unrealistic. Like, that's not really a standard to judge this by. It's a question of, is it a story well told or not? And that's where I think the whole Marvel Disney thing is falling apart because it's no longer a story well told. They've gotten very lazy and very ideological, and they've lost the thread of storytelling. Most people do not watch a movie to be lectured to. Look at Maverick. Some people are trying to say the Disney movies are underperforming because post-COVID people aren't going to the movies. They went to Maverick, right?
Yeah,
there was a movie that did not lecture to them.
Please clap.